Since the EIT was mentioned a couple of times, let me start with a little anecdote. It was September 2015, September 15th, 2008. And you may remember the date because this was the date when Lehman Brothers were announced bankrupt. And we didn't know what it will bring for the world, but we surely didn't anticipate that 6 or even 7 years later, Europe will be still struggling so much with returning to the path of growth and having the hopeful prospects for the future. But for me, this was a meaningful date because this was the time when I met my colleagues from the EIT board and President Barroso, who launched the EIT. This was the last thing you could imagine at a time that policymakers would support private sector thinking. And I'm saying this because today, listening to the previous panel, we talk about entrepreneurship in the context of science. Back then, entrepreneurship was a dirty word in the ivory tower of basic science. And still what we wanted to do, we wanted to create a different platform, a platform where students, entrepreneurial academics, industry, and public funding, universities, could come up with novel solutions to create value. Value being something different for academia and different for people coming from all other parts of the stakeholders community. And we could say that indeed Europe has been very good in developing the partnerships between industry and academia, and still the subsidy model does not work for anyone. We need to develop a novel approach. And I believe that with the panelists, we will be talking about how to develop the open science model for Europe, how to develop the value out of opening infrastructure, and what benefits can it bring for Europe, why it works, why it doesn't work. So let me introduce Professor Hannu Seristo, Vice President of Aalto University for External Relations, an entrepreneur, co-founder, and CEO of a spin-off of CERN, very interesting, called TIN Technologies, Alexander Nitzold, and Professor Jonathan Wareham, Dean of Faculty and Research of ESADE. Let me start with the first question. So we talk about this open science, but we didn't actually say what it is. What does it mean in practice? So let me start with the first question. What does for you, in your experience, open science means? Hannu, if I can ask you to start.
That's a tough one to start with. I think it was touched upon in the earlier panel quite well. There were some problems related to that and all that. But I would actually, having listened to the comments and talks and questions previously, visit this open term a little bit and challenge it a bit. Is it enough if it is open? It's like, during the talks I started to think of a weak analogy to like restaurants. If we have a restaurant that has a great kitchen, the equipment, that's like the infrastructure. We have the chefs, the scientists. It's not enough if we just open the door. We need somebody in the dining hall, some different professionals attracting people and being the interface with the customers and so on. So openness plus something, I think, is what we really should talk about today.
Okay, thank you very much. So openness plus having a host who will welcome strangers, guests, foreigners coming to this infrastructure where science is being made. But let me follow up a little bit. You said open is not everything, but how about, is open free? That's a tricky question. But so let's park it for later. Jonathan, what does open science in your case, in the case of ESADE, mean? How do you understand this? How do you translate this?
Well, I mean, I don't know if I'm best qualified to answer this, but you know, if you look, from what I understand from my readings in the history of science, you know, the scientists that we know, Newton or Galileo or something, these people were incredibly territorial and secretive about their discoveries. And the whole open science paradigm, of course, is about really embracing the idea of science as a social good, as a cultural artifact, and of course allowing whoever wants to participate in, not whoever, but broadening the field about people who participate in terms of the validation and experimentation and the empirical or theoretical stages of that in a crowdfunding sort of way. Now, so the issue, which is, I'm a professor at a School of Management and Law, and Henry brought up this issue of transitioning from a logic where, institutions where the dominant logic is science for the sake of science as a social good, to institutions where you're talking about property right protection and commercialization. How do you make that transition? And that's why it's so interesting for us.
Okay, thank you. Alex, the question for a practitioner from a different perspective, from somebody who actually came as a guest to a world, to the Tower of Science, and took something out of there. How was it open for you?
Well, I guess it was open in the sense that the technology was made available to us. And there was offered initial help to us, both financial and knowledge-wise. And the researchers, although not all of them were perhaps entrepreneurial-minded, they were open to accept that someone could come and have an entrepreneurial mindset on their research and research outputs.
We talked a little bit about Tim Berners-Lee, and indeed when he developed the hypertext, Professor Manuel Castells, with whom I worked on innovation projects, said that he could have thought of patenting, but he deliberately didn't want to do it. He wanted it to be open because he believed that this is a public good, but also he had a mission that this would turn around the world in a sense that the world was shifted since Gutenberg. But the thing is that actually when he developed the what became the World Wide Web, the technology that it was based, the internet, was an old technology. Right? So we can say we're opening the science, but commercializing science actually may take decades to come to markets, to the benefits to the society, to businesses, to entrepreneurs, to university, to students. Hannu, you have a long track record of working in industry and in academia. How would you comment on the time span of opening the science from the investment to bringing the benefit to the stakeholders?
I suppose, as it was touched upon earlier today, it varies by the industry and sector, but can be very long. Pharmaceuticals was mentioned and all that. But it can be very, very fast as well. It can be actually a matter of months that some innovations lead to a company within a few months, and they might grow very, very rapidly. So we just need these good starts and good ideas around.
But I understand that this is without prejudice, so we can take very well an old technology and commercialize it, or we can take a cutting-edge technology and commercialize it. Is this correct?
Well, one perspective is that in a lot of the talks that we've heard today, I think often we think of one discipline perhaps, but Professor Jesper reported that different disciplines and sectors of science are to be brought together, and that's often valuable. So I would testify to that. Our little lessons, what we've done over the last like 6 years in our university.
Yeah, please share. What are you doing at Aalto University?
Well, we have created facilities called Open Innovation House, and facilities, the magnitude of investment is like 100 million euros, so nothing as large as we have heard about today. But anyway, relatively big infrastructures, and purposefully we have put together different sectors of researchers and research, like microscopy and low temperature labs and clean rooms and so on. And then there are these encounters of specialists and experts from different fields, and then good ideas might spark very quickly.
Jonathan, ESADE is very much focused on entrepreneurship and entrepreneurial education. How do you take this focus to work with CERN on opening up the model of open science and open infrastructure?
Well, I think to a certain there's certain naive preconceptions that we have in management schools. And I'll put myself in that same category, our institution in the same category. First of all, we romanticize the discovery and creativity process, and then it's sort of the exercise stops there, right? And that, of course, is unfortunate because that's a very naive conception of what real entrepreneurship is. The other thing is, of course, is this idea that if you build it, customers will come. If you look at the history of the Silicon Valley and so forth, it's, the success there came because there was a huge demand pull from the defense industry, right? And I'm not advocating defense spending or any measure, but the best thing you can do for an innovator, an entrepreneur, is buy their products, right? That's an old saying. And so many of the things that are taught, or so many of the policy discussions, tend to focus on push strategies.
Rather than pull strategies.
Rather than creating a real organic demand for the products and services. Now, of course, you don't have to do one or the other. You can do both at the same time. And the story defense spending, of course, was they did both at the same time, right? They had a well-defined problem. They financed research for it, which is slightly different than pure science. But it's important to understand that there is a very sort of not very sexy, not very romantic part of the innovation or commercialization cycle, which is about finding customers, generating revenue, dealing with commercial contracts, dealing with IP, dealing with distribution channels, blah, 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 blah. And that's something that we as a management school try and emphasize to the best degree we can.
Yeah, I know what you mean. After 10 years in academia, I decided to go back to business and start a Tata consultancy, and we help develop creative partnerships between business and universities. And indeed, Alex, I think you can share some stories about how to take this golden egg of technology and then do the part that Jonathan talked about. What was your process over the last 2 years of commercializing this open software, taking it out of CERN, looking out for markets? What are your strategies? How do you tackle this?
So if you want to summarize the past 2 years in his words, it would be unsexy. That's what I've been doing for the past 2 years. It's basically, I think that's one of the misunderstandings, is that everyone thinks the golden eggs are laying there. They're not. You have to build the market. You have to do a lot of things that are not so sexy. That's what we've been doing, and we've been building a company based on a certain technology. So we have the golden egg, but it needs to be sharpened somehow. That's what we've been doing. We use a platform that was developed by CERN in the beginning of 2000. It's running what is called the CERN document server. So it's a platform where CERN stores all of their research outputs. Publications, reports, articles, multimedia, and in recent years, also research data. And we took that technology that runs in the back end and provided to new prospective clients. And it all started with that more and more people were getting in touch with CERN and said, hey, you got this great platform, can we have it too? And CERN said yes, so they actually made the platform open source. But still, it's a complex thing to install, it's a complex thing to maintain, keep updated, and operate. So that's why they decided, let's make a professional company for providing this, and not only provide the platform, but provide it as a service. That's what TIN Technologies is doing. However, in order to provide this platform to a bigger market, you need to make some adjustments. So we work very closely with CERN and the IT development team there and research team, who have been very welcoming and making some adjustments and helping us get this product out there, not only for a small group, but hopefully for a very, very big group. Yes.
Okay. Talking about benefits then, why would CERN be interested at all to take the time of people working there and support you and share the technology with you? What would be the benefit for a large infrastructure project and renowned research center? Why did they do it?
Good question. I think One obvious benefit is that they get royalties from our company.
Okay, that's a fair. That's clear. But they are not shareholder, right? They cannot be a shareholder.
They can't be a shareholder.
Of course. So
That's
they don't
actually-
take the downside; they take the upside if you're
Yes.
successful. All right.
Yes, they don't take the risk. One thing that was interesting that Henry brought up earlier is actually that he could be a shareholder in companies. That is one thing I think could also work very well for researchers at CERN. Because what are their incentives? I mean, one thing is that CERN has some economic benefit from our spin-off, but they can also tell their membership countries that look at what this science creates for the rest of us. But I'm not sure if that is what is motivating the researchers within IT who are very knowledgeable on the software and who are helping us. They are predominantly motivated on seeing the great technology they have developed spread everywhere. But I would actually want them to have some economic motivation and some stake in this as well. But for now, that's not possible.
Okay.
Maybe I also introduce
Sure, please.
another reason why we are doing it.
Can we have a microphone
Yeah.
here?
One of the reasons why we are doing that also is that we learn from smart people like him, and we improve it. And so we use it. So we use his brain just to do better things. So he thinks that we are working for him, he's working
He's
for
working
us.
for you. So you're getting free intelligence.
So it's this is very important. The other thing is that the royalties, which we are taking from him, is not very much, and
Not yet. Not yet.
not yet. And from other things, Medipix was mentioned before, and other things, we reinsert in this loop. They are not part of our main business. This is taxpayer money of the member state. We use this money just to create the extra resources which are needed just to sponsor that.
Thank you. Hannu, we understand what is in CERN to support entrepreneurs. Now, as a university, what is there for a university, for students and researchers working there to support the model of open science? Why would they be interested? Why do you support it at Aalto?
Well, we have to give back to the society. They pay the bill basically in one way or another, taxation or direct funding or so. So we have to think of the sort of customer value. And by the way, regarding your question of whether open is free, that's difficult because there is like cost and price and value, and let's not get into that discussion of things. But we serve the society, and it's valuable. We particularly see as one of the roles that we have is to facilitate creation of commercial activity out of research. We were coined the Innovation University when we were founded, and it was about €1 billion investment, so that's a heavy burden on our shoulders. We really need to do a lot of things to create companies, and we spin out maybe 60 companies a year from the university activities in one way or another. So it's really, really important. We are serving those who pay the bill.
So actually, when I dig back in my memory to the very beginning of Aalto University, I was part of the research assessment exercise. But what was more interesting for me, that I was there at a time where this experiment of bringing the three schools was done in Europe for the first time. But also, I witnessed what happened with students, that they started Aalto Entrepreneurship Society. I was actually one of the first fans on their Facebook page. But then it spun out into Venture Garage, into Startup Sauna, into all this entrepreneurial fever. And I remember talking with Professor Tula Terry, the president, and I said, how do you do it? How come the university supports this entrepreneurship fashion? And she said, oh, all we do, we try not to get in the, we try not to disturb the students. But let me then return back the question to you, Jonathan. Students are at the core value, I understand, of your school, right? Helping them advance. How do you bring them into your collaboration with CERN? How do you do this?
Okay, well, I mean, we're an educational institution. We have the same social mandate and subscribe to the same similar values that Aalto University does. What we're working right now with the Attract initiative is we're doing these challenge-based innovations. So that's a specific thing that I think Sergio mentioned, and I'll just give you a little more detail. These are taking design thinking methods and creating groups of multidisciplinary students. And our students come from management, of course. We sent 6 MBA students up to Geneva this past year, but they could come from the social sciences, anthropology, design, engineering, physics, what have you. And they put them together in these groups, and these processes go over a longer period of time, 4 months typically, where they use design thinking methodologies to look at the basic technologies that CERN has developed and try and create or devise or invent or what have you, come up with some new ways that they can be applied. So that's, once again, that's kind of on the creation side, and it's really a valuable experience for the students. More importantly, I would say it has the value that resonates with what I was saying before, that because of the success of consumerized technologies like this, students tend to focus on that. And a lot of these technologies that they're developing at CERN may or may not go directly into the device, but certainly go into issues of the life or medical sciences, energy, food sciences, and so forth. And these industrial sectors are very, very important and absolutely large. And this is another way that we can emphasize that perspective with our students.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you very much. Yeah. Hannu, you want to add something?
Perhaps comment linking with the issue of how to run these open platforms of research and so on in the future better. One facet that hasn't been mentioned is that we should, based on our experience, link the young students very much in those activities. Why? Because they are the future managers either in the industry or they are the future scientists. And if they are trained to that sort of a collaboration while they are studying still, we are sort of educating these ambassadors between 2 sectors in the society and facilitating the collaboration in the future. So very, very important to have the young students involved.
Okay, so if you were to give me 2 or 3 must-do things to have open science model work, what will they be? You said include early in the process students. Do you mean undergrad or grad, PhD? Even on the undergrad level, undergraduate level. Okay, so this would be one good to do or must do thing to make it successful. What would be other things? Sure.
I would go back to what Dr. van den Biesen mentioned. You opened the Philips labs for small companies and so on, and I think you mentioned it's not a trivial thing to do. And I would really, really emphasize it takes different professionals and people with passion to make that interface work. And it's a tough job. Typical scientists probably cannot do it. You need special people, and you need to resource that well. If it's like 60% for people, scientists, and 39% for infra, and 1% for this kind of dining hall activity, that's probably not enough. But if you have 3%, that might be fantastic, and it would fly.
Okay, so the second thing is to bring diverse talent into the game, okay, into the projects, okay? So number 2, what other success factors, what other must do to make it work things could be?
Well, I would say be open and involved entrepreneurs, whether they're students, whether they're very experienced entrepreneurs, be open to invite them and look at the technologies, work with the researchers. I think that's very important because they see the opportunities. A researcher who is could sit on a golden egg, but he doesn't know it. So involve people who have the knowledge and see the applications and see the bigger value.
So point 3, have entrepreneurs as part of the team and part of the culture. I must say that on the EIT board, when we discussed what is the missing link in the knowledge triangle, coming from the emerging markets of Central and Eastern Europe, I believe that this is entrepreneurship. Because you can say that our economies were not as advanced and research-based as the Western economies of Europe, but definitely the progress that the society was able to make was based on this entrepreneurial fever. And I'm happy to hear that Dr. Van Biesen said that entrepreneurship actually is turning the EIT model. It's working, and I'm very happy that you're raising this point as well. So we have number 3 elements. Number 3. What would be number 4, Jonathan?
Well, going back to my previous argument, I mean, you're going from an institution where the dominant logic is one thing, right? Science for the social good, and that's wonderful. And if you're going to interest venture capital, if you're going to interest businesses and so forth, it's all about property right protection, residual property rights, money, rate of return, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So how do you make that transition? And there's a big how question that you know, some institutions have answered reasonably well with their technology transfer offices and so forth. But given the unique characteristics of CERN and its political constituency and so forth, is a fairly complicated problem. So creating, what Sergio had mentioned, creating the organisms, the mechanisms, the governing bodies to help transition between these two logics, I think is really not only important that our students understand it, but as an institution that does research in these sort of things, a really, really exciting, challenging question to be answered.
I think we came up with an excellent list of key success factors. This systemic approach that if we want to bring serious money, serious science institutions, serious industry, we need to have a governance system to have clear rules and to set out strategic directions, form partnerships, and manage them. Again, when we were discussing how to form the governance of the KICs, of the knowledge innovation communities, I must say that I was, being a researcher at the time, it was my curiosity-driven search to understand why in certain places like Silicon Valley things work. Why in certain places like Michigan, I was for some years at the University of Michigan, why it's so difficult to shift from a traditional industrial economy that Europe has been so strong at and move towards this post-industrial digital economy, and how can a university contribute to it? I write about my experiences, my observations, developing the KIC model in a forthcoming book on innovation entrepreneurship, a new model for growth in Europe, which will be published shortly. But if you were to summarize with one key sentence, why should European policymakers focus on promoting the openness of science? What would this argument be? And after this, we will open the floor to questions. And if we have any Twitter questions, Florin? We don't, okay. So do we have any questions before you give the final call? Time for 2 questions. Yes, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Patrice Boekholt from Technopolis. We're struggling with this innovation gap already a decade, and I'm not sure we've really tackled that. And I want to come back to your remark of saying, is it enough to open the restaurant? My question is, opening science, opening universities is a very good initiative, and opening CERN. But aren't we collectively underestimating the capacity, the resources, the knowledge needed for these last phases before the market, where small companies are struggling to get it done? The prototyping, the testing, is it safe? Can we get this certified? This very last mile. And it's often said, well, that's the private sector, but shouldn't the universities and the research centers not play a stronger role in these very last phases, where well, if you have deep pockets for a big company, yes, you might be able to do that yourself. But if you're a small company, that is exactly where, you run out of resources and people and capacities to do that last end. What is the role for universities and public sector?
Thank you very much for this question. Should a university embrace the third mission? Should it involve into economic development?
Absolutely should, I think, but there is a limit how far the mandate of a university actually goes. And there comes a limit when you have to say that, okay, it's the other players in the ecosystem to take over, VC and so on. But we can perhaps stretch a little bit that limit from what it is or where it is today in Europe.
Definitely, not every university should embrace the third mission. It should be a strategic choice, but for sure in Europe, the universities that, like Aalto, focus on this, or ESADE, will be becoming European Stanfords and MITs, and I'm keeping my fingers crossed for this. We have the time for the very last question. Yes, please.
Good evening. My name is De Smet. I work for 9 Sigma. 9 Sigma is a open innovation solution provider. And of course, we bring the needs of companies to the world, to the open innovation community. And what we see is that about 50% of the solution providers come out of industry and 35% come out of the academics, out of universities. But I say this global. And when I say 35% academics, they mainly come out of the US. The universities in the US are really contributors to our business, let's say, and not so many out of Europe. And I was wondering why that would be.
I mean, that's so difficult to answer that question. I would, having been in both systems, I would say the culture in those institutions is slightly different, and the type of students they attract are slightly different, and so forth. So their behaviors are different, and that's that.
If I may add, I think it's a matter of branding and promotion, and I think we should change this. Among other things we do at Tata Innovation, we work with the World Economic Forum, and I'm searching for examples of collaborative innovation, of success in Europe, where industry and academia collaborate to develop very different models of how to generate new companies, new prototypes, new product solutions. So I'm very happy to bring this to the global community at the World Economic Forum. I think it's important that we are much more proud of what we're achieving, that we're much more boosting what is being done. And I think Europe is actually at the forefront of policy innovation globally. So for policymakers, if you were to give one last a wish list point, what would you say? What could they do to help you achieve your goals? Related to open science, of course.
Well, there's enormous potential. It just needs proper resourcing. I'm afraid that it will take a long time before it's properly given resources in Europe. But enormous potential. And just to comment, not only like scientists and companies, but also other talented people in the society, like artists and so on, might be brought in. Okay.
So policymakers should create programs open or fostering diversity. And I must say that there are not many women in science, are there? Okay, so a little hint for policymakers. Alex.
I think the lady over here was actually raising a good point that I think sometimes research institutions, universities are underestimating what it actually takes to commercialize the technology. My team is very hungry, which means that we do a lot with very little resources. But I wish that there was more resources available for these types of research spin-outs, because as Henry, Professor Chesbro said as well, there is more risk in the initial phase. We need more resources to create more spin-offs.
And I understand from our earlier talk that it's resources in terms of money, but also resources in terms of mentors who will help you grow the business and commercialize it. I think it's a very valid point. Mm-hmm. Jonathan.
No, I would simply just say support initiatives like Attract and other initiatives that provide the processes and governance and tools and platforms to make this important transition from idea to discovery to commercialization.
So in a way, encourage and give leeway for experimentation in this space. I believe that the EIT was such a small experiment. Now it's a big institution. Yeah. So I think if I were to add one last thing, would be let experiment, but then help scale it up across Europe.
No, and it just in that with the EIT, it means redefining the social meaning of what that type of institution is, and they're still having communication problems, right? Because right, but right because it's just what is this thing, right? But that would also mean with CERN or basic scientific research infrastructures, if we want to develop other social or economic benefits from them, we may have to redefine the mental model of what these things are.
Very interesting. Yeah. So not only promote and give leeway to small projects, small in the sense of system, but also have courage to redefine the innovation system in Europe at large.
Indeed.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, the panel.